Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Growth Leap. I'm your host Michel Gagnon. We talk to pretty awesome business builders who are designing disruptive and meaningful companies. If you don't own any Bitcoins yet, this episode is for you. We talked to Dave Pouliot, founder and CEO of Coimiles, a Montreal-based startup that gives you free Bitcoins when you shop online. Dave is a former detective and lawyer turned tech startup founder. He's extremely authentic, he's passionate about cryptocurrency and the positive impact it can have in our society. Dave shares his experience and practical advice on how to raise money, build a tech startup with a non-tech background, hire engineers, and how to survive an app launch in the middle of a pandemic. Enjoy. Dave Pouliot, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure having you with us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Michel.
Dave, you are founder and CEO of Coinmiles. Before that, you're a man of many lives. You were a detective sergeant for the Montreal police. You also worked as associate lawyer for Davis Ward, Phillips and Weinberg. Coinmiles, I believe, is your second startup baby. Let's start with the basics. Can you tell us a bit about Coinmiles? What is it? What you guys do?
Yeah, so Coimiles is an app that gives you Bitcoin cashback when you shop online or in store if you're in Canada. So it's simply like one of those apps where you would click on the link, activate an offer similar to Rakuten, Ebates, and the likes. But rather, we chose to give Bitcoin rewards, given that we thought that Bitcoin rewards was much more interesting than giving out cash for various reasons.
Okay, we'll get to that. So basically, what's the business model? You're sending referrals to different partners and then you're getting a commission out of that?
Yeah, that's correct. There's no magic here. We don't make, of course, Bitcoin appear out of thin air. So it's entirely commission based, at least for now. As we grow, we have various revenue sources. But for now, we essentially take a cut. We receive a commission. We give portion of that commission back to our users in Bitcoin, and we keep the remaining portion as a form of revenue. So it's pretty simple what we have. We don't reinvent the wheel here, at least for the online purchases. When it comes to in-store purchases, this is where we do innovate, at least in Canada. So we have an agreement with Visa and MasterCard. So it's a bit different. We do require our users to link their credit card one time and one time only in the app. And then after every time they use their credit cards to shop at some of our partners' location, they automatically get Bitcoin cash back again in the app. So we really wanted to make sure our users would get a full experience using Coimiles.
And are there any regulations that you have to follow because you're giving Bitcoins?
There's always regulations we have to follow. Now, the question is like which one applies to us in which circumstances. I'm a lawyer by training, so I really wanted to make sure that our company was on the right side of law. That's super important for us. We don't want to take any risks when it comes to that. Of course, Bitcoin, if you want to require your users to invest in Bitcoin, and in a lot of cases, at least the securities regulators would assert some form of jurisdiction, whether you're in Canada or abroad. But that's something we made very clear from the outset, that we didn't want our users to give us any of their money. So we have no way of charging our users in any means. We solely exist to give them Bitcoin. We don't exist for them to invest in any way, shape, or form using Coinmiles.
Your app is available, if I'm not mistaken, in Canada, but also the US and France.
Canada, US, and France for now. Of course, always seeking to go into more countries. It's always a trade-off as a CEO of a startup. So you want to go as fast as possible and scale as much as possible. But also, even if you scale in terms of countries, that doesn't mean you can create a good experience for those countries. So we're trying to hit the sweet spot here. We really want to go fast. We think we're going extremely fast already, especially given the quality we're trying to give on the app. We're really proud of the experience we're giving our users, but it's always a question of what kind of local partnership that is going to interest the users of my next country. So we don't want to just go in a country to go in a country. For us, it's important that we go in the country the right way, and we can onboard users that are going to use the app and enjoy the app.
I want to talk about the user experience before, because I managed to test your app.
Awesome.
But before we get there, I want to know the backstory of Coinmiles. Basically, how do you get from being a detective to launching a Bitcoin startup? You're the first cop that I have on my podcast, a former cop. I want to know the story.
Yeah, it's funny because people usually they tend to remember the cop side more than the lawyer side. I guess the first step was for me to go from, detective sergeant here at the Montreal police to being a financial litigation lawyer at Davies Ward, Phillips Vandenberg. Initially for me, it was just like, I was really happy as a cop. Of course, I was like kind of in some way living my childhood dream, but there's a point where you're in life, you ask yourself the question, why do I want to achieve? And if you want to build something greater than yourself, being in a public job is it always has some constraints. I have tons of respect for those who are choosing that path forward. We need good and talented individuals. But for me, it was really about building something. And so I went back to law school, did my law school, did an MBA, did the bar, got sworn in as a lawyer. And then, of course, given my interest in finance, I got this job at, I guess, one of the Canadian top tier law firm, which I'm super proud of. I learned a lot of stuff while working there. I learned in law and legal background, but I also learned a lot in business. I mean, in terms of how do you manage a company? How do you manage a type A personality kind of culture? So Davies was an interesting firm because it wasn't not the biggest firm, but it was a super driven, high intensity, high energy firm. And then I learned a lot on a personal level while working there also. But again, looking at who I was as a lawyer, I love the cases I was working on, but you always felt like, you have one asset when you're a professional and it's yourself. And it's great. I mean, there's lots of money to be made in that field, maybe much more so than in the startup world in a lot of ways, at least in the short term, that's for sure. But again, it always this calling of building something greater than yourself. So I ended up launching first startup, which was a purely financial startups to facilitate private vehicle transactions when it comes to financing, insurance, and so on. And this is where I guess, hit by the Canadian VC financing reality. And from there, you're out of this blue chip law firm and you've done an MBA. So you're, fresh out in this new startup world. And you think that it's just going to go like it goes in a movie almost. So you have this idea, you need $1 million and you go pitch this idea. And I remember the first question I got asked. I mean, it's a question that many of us have gone through, but if you don't know that, you don't know that. And the first question I got asked was like, how many users do you have? What's your data, your cohort data? What's your traction? What's your revenue? And I'm like, oh, no, you're not hearing me well. I'm here to raise $1 million to build this thing. And they're like, no way, you're never going to get my money if you haven't built something before. And then it really puts you in the chicken or hen situation. To get the first check in Canada, it's incredibly hard. And then while working on this, I, of course, grew my passion for Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is just like, it touches finance, it touches law, it touches so many things that really excites me. And so growing my passion, I had this second project. And I found in that environment that there was a lot of people willing to support projects. And I guess that's the first extremely valuable lesson as how to exist first as a tech entrepreneur. If you're not from a tech background, it's to be able to raise money. Essentially, that's the number one. And you'd rather be in a hot environment where there's a lot of passion and drive and money to support you over an industry. Like, an industry could be ripe for disruption, but if there's no one really willing to cut you your first check, and if you can't code the tech yourself, like a lot of time people can't if they're not from a tech background, it's you got to be in a hot industry.
Well, that's a great story. I really like. I mean, we need to make a movie about this. You've talked about funding, and maybe we could just jump on that. I really liked what you said about, the first question you got. I'm based in Germany, and I would say the VC world in Germany may be a bit similar to the Canadian one. The first thing they ask is not what's your user growth rate, it's how much money are you making, correct, which is slightly different, which is not a question that the Twitter founders got asked, I guess, when they launched, right?
Yeah.
So it's slightly different. You've raised close to $1 million right now. Yeah. What advice do you have? What have you learned so far with fundraising?
It's really like you're going to try 200 times and you're going to get one. But usually once you get someone that is interested in you and your story and what you're building, that person usually has connection to open up doors for you. So don't waste. There's so many lessons, and all of those lessons are kind of intangible. So there's a lot of people who will show interest, but they will ask you for, a third or fourth PowerPoint modification. And if you're at a point where that person keeps on asking you to correct a PowerPoint and send a PowerPoint and send more information. There's a point where you're extremely early stage. They either get the principle or they don't. So sometimes some back and forth in terms of due diligence is good. Usually when it comes to more than 2 or 3 rounds of askings in terms of due diligence, you're likely not going to get a check from that person. That's from my own experience. So look for people who, I guess, already believe in the thesis that you have. As a company, you always build upon the fact that there's this big market opportunity to tap into, and there's going to be a lot of money. If not at day 0 or day 1, there's going to be money, maybe at year 4 or 5, but you are shooting here for people who want to invest in you for the long run. So it really helps having this, I guess, introduction into that person that believes in you, that can open up door. And until you find that person, you don't exist. Essentially, it's really tough. Surround yourself with people that believe in you, and these persons will end up at some point opening at least one door. In all likelihood, you're going to have to nurture those relations for at least a certain time before you cut your first check, if that's the reality you live in, of course.
You managed to find that person who believed in you and gave the first check. Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, wrote a while back, when you look at investment, there are a few things you can look at. You look at the quality of the team, you look at the quality of the product or the idea, and you look at if it's the right time for that idea in the market.
That's correct.
In your case, when people, decided to support you, what did you feel was the most important element?
Definitely not the quality of the product back then. It was to be fair, it was a crappy product. It was something that was in functioning barely at first. It was more of I wouldn't call it an MVP by any means. It was like a proof of concept, and even to call it a proof of concept is a stretch. Investors, they want to touch and feel something. You got to show them something that they can touch, play on the app side. They can see that it's going to grow somewhere. And then it really, it creates a much durable impression. And those extra points you may get by doing that can be the difference between whether you get a check or not. And in this case, for us, I think that was the case. And so, of course, with that check, you don't stop there. You hire more engineers and you keep perfecting your product. So it wasn't the product. In terms of the team, we had a very small team, but I think I really tried, I guess, to get people on the team that are, that kind of type A person, people that really believe in what we do in terms of the mission of the company, people that are smart, that have good values. I mean, good values would be the number one thing. So I guess the first thing I'm afraid of I would be afraid of as a financier, it would be to give $100,000 check to someone and they just pocket this check and go buy themselves a Lamborghini with it. You want to get someone, an entrepreneur that says, I'm willing to sacrifice my own salary. And a lot of portion of my team where they just want to cut through, their daily expenses. And nobody's here to make a quick buck. We want to build something strong. And I guess that's the kind of, if you project that confidence as a person and as a team, I guess for me, that's something, I guess, the investors saw in our team. I was very straight. We're not investing in me to make money in the first round. It was back in 2019 before I raised some form of money. I mean, early 2019, we had this crypto winter. We really had to have people that were believing in this thing for the long run. But I think Bitcoin is a special space because there's people that are invested in this industry are so invested, and that the past has proven them right, at least up until now, and they're super bullish for the future as well. So they were in the right mentality from the start, I would say.
Launching a startup is pretty tough. When you need to develop something on top of that, and you don't necessarily have a tech background, it's even maybe a bit more daunting. How did you initially get started to get that first crappy prototype that you talked about earlier?
We hired some engineers at very low rates. That's how we did that. I guess from my perspective, coming from a legal and / financial background, I knew the kind of operations I would have to put in place. So I had a very good view on what we were building and why we were building it. And so far, those assumptions are still holding to be true for the most part. So I guess I was kind of on track when it came to giving at least a blueprint of what we're building and how it's going to work. And this is the industry. This is how we connect pieces A with pieces B, and then we make them work together. But then it's really about hiring an engineer that is really ready to give you a small prototype. And from there, you cut a big check and you hire, I guess, better and more committed engineers, people that wants to grow with your team, and you grow from there. And right now, the team we have in the team is pretty exceptional. I mean, People are working hard, and they I think we really have a very great culture where we are proactively anticipate what's ahead of us. So very proud of what the engineering team in house at Coimiles is doing, because they're not only just building a feature for building a feature. They understand why we're doing it, and they're anticipating what's ahead of us in the next round and in the next two rounds. And that's what makes us, I guess, scale relatively fast. And I would say, without too much humility here, but I think we have a great product. And I think that's a great part because we have a great engineering culture in Coinmiles.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. It's a great story, but how do you actually find great committed people? We've had quite a few guests on our podcast. A lot of them are building something meaningful. Right? They're not just building another gimmick. And it feels like, when you talk about Bitcoin, it feels a bit more like a mission or a calling than just building a startup. How do you actually find those people? Because there is a lot of people out there looking for a job. We've talked about values earlier. When you hire, what are you looking for?
It's a great question. I guess I'm really looking for someone who's integrity first, but integrity more than just being not breaking any law. That's of course integrity, but integrity in the sense that they take their job seriously and they will go over and beyond. They will think about that even when they're not on the job. They will think like, how can I be better? Someone who can really make sure that they're not gonna just do a 9 to 5 kind of job, but they want to improve on that. They want to get better. They want to contribute to the team, and it's a lot of interviews, to be fair, and it's also a good question of gut feeling. So we made the choice at Coimiles not to hire based on numbers, but hire based on quality, but also be opportunistic. So there has been times at Coimiles where, for example, I wanted to pay myself as a founder, but I chose not to pay myself so I could onboard one more great engineers that just appeared on our radar. So you don't get to usually choose the momentum and the quality of the personnel you work with and so on. As a startup, you're in the radar needs to be constantly open, constantly reaching out. And as you find an interesting dot on your radar, I guess it's your job to go in and get it. And we've had a lot of internal references, for example. A lot of our employees were meaningful in attracting other good employees. And so that's something never to discount. I mean, I guess your best ambassadors as a company is your team. Usually you try to attract quote unquote quality people that will in turn surround themselves with quality people. And then you create as best as possible this virtuous circle where you want to grow your company based on the values you're looking for. So there's no secret sauce, but be opportunistic, I guess, would be my takeaway here.
And you're running, as you said, quite a few interviews.
A lot of interviews, a lot of informal interviews. And I guess that's my way of approaching things. I mean, from the technical side of things, I leave that to the more specialized department in-house. But when it comes to my own style of interview, I mean, that may trace back to my background as a cop, I've done that for 7 years, like for 7 years, my job was to talk to people, so in a lot of time in harsh situations. So you get a very good reading on, I guess, how human reactions. And from initially doing being as a patrol officer, uniformed officer in a car, answering to disputes and any kinds of interactions you could possibly imagine. Some of them are crazy ones. And then going into a detective surgeons where you have to be in a room with someone for hours and try to have them confess that they've just committed a crime. So when you do that for several years, I guess you become somehow perceptive of human nature. Yeah. So I really rely on that when it comes to my own style. So it's, of course, not 100% reliable. I'm asking the regular question, what's your experience? What's this, with that? But I'm always trying to find the right questions, put the candidates into some form of situations where what would happen? What would you do if we had this in the company? How would you? And then you get to see react. Like, there's a lot of people who wants to come in startup. We have so many people that apply, and a lot of people, they apply to startups, and they still have this big firm mentality, depending on who's listening to this. But if you're seeking to jump into a startup world, and the first question you ask is like, what kind of resources do I have? And the answer would likely be, you have zero resources. That's the whole point. If I see that this person is going to be driven by an environment where the only resources is them, and they don't have to rely on me. And a lot of people would tend to do that. They would rely on their boss. They would ask their boss, what would you do? And they would bounce ideas with you every hour. But you cannot do that with every employee once you start having 5, 6, 7 employees. So you really want someone who can take the ball and run with it. And so that's really what I'm trying to see in someone. And I guess even if that person doesn't have the 100% experience. A lot of time we don't when we start a project. It's important for me to see that person will take the ball and run with it. And I'm trying to ask questions and set up an environment where I would get at least a gut feeling as to whether that person will act like this or not.
That's very interesting that you're saying big firm mentality, because I believe it's Mark Roberge, who used to be the chief revenue officer of HubSpot, who said that, one of the key mistakes that startups make is that when they start getting traction, they go hire a big star salesperson from, one of the big companies, the tech companies. And these guys are used to have, the CRM in order, predictive analyses and people who actually do the legwork for them. And obviously, these guys are not the right ones for the stage of development that you're in. So, yeah, I agree with you. It's a bit challenging. Yeah. But just to make sure, you have a distributed team, right? So I think half or your engineering team is based in Vancouver?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have people in Vancouver, people in Toronto, and we have a team in Montreal, where I am as well. So a distributed team in 3 cities, the 3 main Canadian cities.
Okay, so for you, doing virtual meetings was not necessarily a problem.
It's how the company grew from the start. So we were built in this distributive model. But that being said, our team in Vancouver is trying to meet, well, as much as possible given COVID. But it's important for them to meet. I was trying to do the same thing here in Montreal when we were capable of doing it. So it's still important for me to try to meet in person as much as possible, because there's this part where there's this synergies of people where you learn from being with one another. But I guess it's been 95 or 97% remote from the start. And so it's been interesting. So for us, COVID happened, and at least on that part, we weren't hit. We were hit on so many other levels, but not on this side.
But talking about COVID, you've launched your app in mid-March, which was exactly when the government of Quebec announced the first lockdown.
What a nightmare.
I'm sure. A nightmare.
It was a terrible time. Oh my God, I didn't sleep all night. Yeah.
I guess, but I'm sure you've learned a lot about managing pressure, prioritizing, pivoting. Tell us about the experience, what you've been through and how you actually reacted.
Yeah, so to give some context here, our initial plan was not to do online purchases at all. We knew nothing, back in April about, frankly, that online purchases industry. Well, we knew a bit, we knew it worked, but we had nothing done. Our MVP, our go-to-market strategy from day one, the launch, was to drive people in restaurants. So we had this partnership with Visa MasterCard we're super happy of. We got something like 50 local restaurants here in Montreal. Near universities, near downtown hubs, Our job is to have them go and eat into some of our partners and get free Bitcoin. And we were planning to go into offices and pitch Coimiles to, law firms and accounting firms and students in major universities in Montreal. But then COVID happened and all the restaurants had to close. And then we ended up, after a year worth of working on a product with, I guess, a market that was in some ways illegal. The restaurants were prohibited from even existing at that point. And so we tried calling them. We weren't sure, of course, in the first week how long this thing was gonna stay. We made lots of calls, but most of our restaurant partners, they were just as confused as we were. And of course, who wants to close one more marketing initiatives with essentially what we're providing them when there's this crisis? They don't even know if they're going to make the cut, if they're going to survive. And for us, how much do I want to put resources into potentially onboarding partners that unfortunately may go down during this year? Who knows what's going to happen? Especially back in March, nobody knew what's going to happen. So we took a solid week to call them, try to get the pulse of the market. The market was dead. The pulse is there was no pulse. there was no pulse. The market was dead.
Call 911.
He called. Yeah, of course. So we had to, convene as a team, and we had to make a very hard turn. But I don't call it a pivot. The great thing is that, this is where Bitcoin came in handy for us, because we were giving Bitcoin, we can go international very quick. And we have a strong differentiator with traditional cashback websites, right? And we were in Canada, and we're the first one in Canada to be doing that too. So we were in a very strong strategic position then. And so from April, going back, we had nothing done. No interface, no backend, nothing. And from April to July, we went all in. 120% into this thing, closing as many partnerships as possible, trying to start approaching new beta testers. And this is where we had a very hard time in those 3 months because we were discovering an industry. But then we launched in July with a kind of a soft launch, but already it became quite popular. We went we marketed our our app into some crypto groups, and people we got hundreds of users at a time, which is for a small startups. I mean, you get your first hundreds of users, and then it's a good segment to test your app. We understand our products much better now. We have daily transactions. I mean, dozens of transactions a day. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And we're clearly seeing that the metrics are going the right way.
So you started with a cryptocurrency group to get your initial users. What strategies have you used in the past few months to acquire users?
Lots of trials and errors. I mean, initially the crypto group was kind of the second initiative. The first initiatives was when we, the first MVP we had for this thing was when we had a website only. So we had a website that was giving Bitcoin cashback, but we realized that because it was a website, people, they don't get, put yourself in the user's shoes for a second. You see an ad on Facebook that says, we're going to give you free Bitcoin when you shop online. So we had this, it looks too good to be true kind of marketing challenge to overcome. And then we had a website which was looking good. I would say, okay. From there, we said, okay, what comforts user? And we realized that having an app is essentially our users, when it's kind of quote unquote vetted by Apple or vetted it's on the Google Play Store, it is more legit. They know that it works in a safe environment. And from a marketing perspective, it really helped for us going and taking this extra step into launching our app like really quick, which we've done something like a month and a half after our official launch. And so we rely on social media. We rely on word to mouth. We just implemented this referral system. We just got covered by one of Montreal's biggest newspapers, Journal de Montréal. We still have other medias that are interested in talking to us. So we are slowly, I guess, putting ourselves out there, getting bigger and more interesting partnerships. And so far, this is what we've done. And we've seen very good feedback.
So putting the app on the App Store gave you a bit of a bump in terms of customer acquisition. It was good for marketing, good for credibility.
Yeah.
You've tried different things so far. What works better at the moment?
In our case, we give free Bitcoin. We are literally an app that gives you free Bitcoin when you shop online at Walmart or eBay. So it's kind of if you love Bitcoin and you do shop online, like pretty much everybody, it's a kind of a no-brainer to use Coimiles, right? A lot of people are interested in Bitcoin, but they haven't invested yet. So they haven't taken the leap yet. And now they're taking their first leap, but they're doing their first experiment with Coimiles. And so we have tons of customer requests for lots of reasons, like how does it work from the cash on my Bitcoin? Very simple things, but we try to be there with our users and assist them. And I think that is the kind of relation with our users that is going to pay off in the long run. I mean, being there, making sure that we answer them, you read the pulse of the market. And so far, this is what we've done. We'll see in the future. I mean, there's dozens of new things I'd love to try, but I would lie if I would come to you and pose as an expert in marketing. I'm not. So lots of things for me to discover as well as an entrepreneur.
You definitely have a real passion for Bitcoins. You've said in the past that you want to make Bitcoins easy to understand for people, which is pretty much in line with what you just said. You said that you feel like to a certain extent, you're contributing to their financial education. You've talked about Bitcoin winter. I mean, I think we've reached a 3-year high in Bitcoin price this week.
Yeah, it's a good time
above 17,000. You said earlier, look, we think we have an edge because we're not giving cash back, we're giving Bitcoins. I mean, the Canadian dollars does not increase 70%, over a month or go down, by 30%. It's a different ball game, right? For the average consumer. What's your take on this? If you want to make it easier, don't you feel that there is definitely a lot more volatility than if you were just getting, a currency back?
They get something they would have not gotten otherwise. So even if they're $5, let's put a nightmare scenario here, and Bitcoin goes down 50%, like in 1 week. Like even if they got $5 using Coimiles and it goes down to $2.50, like they still got $2.50 using Coimiles. So Bitcoin is based on, I guess, from the high level perspective, a deflationary nature. There's going to be 21 million Bitcoin issued, and that's it. Whereas in terms of money, of course, we're seeing the money supply increasing. There's a lot of credible institutions that are increasingly seeing Bitcoin as a form of, I would say, valeur refuge in French. I'm not quite sure what that would be in English, but a safe place to put your money to pair for the inflation or market turbulence. And so I guess for that, given that there's this nature in Bitcoin itself, And the fact that we're essentially, I wouldn't say crumbles, but I mean, when you give $5 worth of cash back, $10 worth of cash back, it's not high money. It's not like I'm asking my users to invest $1,000 that may go down, or $10,000 that may go down. We are passively putting $10 in Bitcoin, which they would have never done otherwise. I mean, who goes into a Bitcoin exchange and buy for $2 worth of Bitcoin? Nobody does that, right? And so that's a way, it's just a consuming habit where you keep adding and adding and adding it. And as we partner with those brands, there's also this great things that happen is that we can get better partnerships. I mean, we have secured some partnerships where we're able to increase the cashback amount by a lot. I mean, we are that same person that would go and buy this hockey gear for $500. I mean, using Coinmiles, they now can get up to $50 back in Bitcoin. So that's a good deal for our users. There's no risk in getting $50 back. Even if 50 goes to become 25 in the short run, I mean, in the long run, I think people are the market is extremely bullish on Bitcoin.
When, things started, many people discredited the whole idea.
Yeah.
It became, at a certain extent, a new hype. It got a bit of a bad rap over scams, lack of regulations, hackers, criminal activity. Yeah. What you are telling me, and I think what the market is saying these days, a crypto fund manager, Grayscale, holds something like $10 billion worth of Bitcoin. What you're telling me is that, yes, it's not perfect, but there's, let's say, a bright future for cryptocurrency in the future.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, not surprised that at first Bitcoin was discredited as a crazy idea. I mean, I was part of that group that thought that Bitcoin was a crazy idea. One of the first assignment I got as a I guess a newly young lawyer was back then. I mean, it was like we were wondering how Bitcoin should be taxed. And I had to work on a case where we had to present, our legal position as to how Bitcoin should be taxed in Canada, because nobody knew what Bitcoin was. It was just this weird idea that there could be some form of currency, and people that once they don't understand what the backbone of Bitcoin, the proof of work, how permanent this is as a record, they would think that anybody could create their own Bitcoin, and they would confuse Bitcoin with those ERC20 tokens, and they would just not see the real value behind this infrastructure. So there was a lot of scam, of course, but those scams are not from the Bitcoin, network itself. It's people who are holding other people's Bitcoin. When you say not your keys, not your Bitcoin, there's a lot of people who are holding other people's Bitcoin. And of course, there was this huge gap in regulations back then where they could create their own exchange. Quadriga is probably one of the most infamous cases, and it's a Canadian one where the owner lost, quote unquote, the Bitcoin. And that is if he lost them and if he didn't steal them, of course. So this is an industry where you have to have legitimate player. We're extremely proud to be legitimate players, and I think there's going to be increasingly legitimate players. And people are just like anything; they're getting more educated. They understand what a bad apple looks like and what good apples looks like too. And they're just they're making their call, just like in the stock market. There's good stock, there's bad stock, there's good industry, there's bad industry. It's just that's part of growing up as an industry. And I think right now it's not a mature industry; it's still very early, but it's getting more and more mature. And there's a lot more education, and there's a lot more people who are now open to the idea that they may have a little bit of Bitcoin on the side, and on the side, just as a form of investment, the diversification of their portfolio. And I think that's interesting. And when it comes to what it brings to how we see society, how we see money, how we see, the value of Bitcoin in this whole economy. Bitcoin is not the economy. There's so much more to Bitcoin in the economy. It has a place, but it's not the whole thing. So I guess it's finding its place and it's finding its niche, and it's super interesting.
Let's go back to Coinmiles more specifically. People sign up. I think you even offer a sign-up bonus, which means that the minute they sign up, you have Bitcoins in your portfolio.
Yeah.
What kind of metrics are you following to see how the business is going? How do you measure success?
For us, it's acquisition and activation. The way we decided to give a little bit of Bitcoin to start, we'll see if we keep that. So far, it's been interesting because we have a lot of users that say, well, I don't know how Bitcoin works. And now we have an argument to tell them, well, now you have some. It's in your wallet. So see, it wasn't that hard. You signed up using Facebook and now you have some Bitcoin. We really wanted to crush this barrier from the outset. Tell them you don't have to, it's not super common. You sign up, we put some sats in it's not a lot. It's clearly not a lot, but it's enough that that you now have some, right? So keep using Coimiles when you purchase by one click before. If you can buy a t-shirt online, you can get some free Bitcoin in your Coimiles wallet. And so that's the whole reason why we've decided to go this way.
You said that you had, at a certain point, you had to make 60 to 100 calls a day.
Yeah.
When you manage a startup, it's a crazy roller coaster. You do podcast interviews, you sell, you raise money, you fix tech problems, you guide people. How do you actually prioritize? How do you manage the day?
That's a tough one because that's the first question I try to ask myself every morning, and I'm not sure I'm getting the right answer all the time. So you do your best. You try to keep your head out of the water. I mean, I'm not gonna come and say, I'm a Zen monk or what something. I'm not. I just like everybody else. I wake up in the morning and I'm wondering like what's the priority today, and I take a shot. I say, okay, that should be the priority. And as one thing I noticed as a lawyer. I was mostly focused on working on one case, for example. So I would take 2 hours and work on a case and then switch and work on another case. You're constantly interrupted. That's the thing. So your brain kind of is rewired into this very short attention span, high energy, where you used to have this long. I used to, I think, have a much higher attention span before I became an entrepreneur. Now it's really trying to set sometimes to do the hard task, the complex one, and sometimes, just to be there to answer all the various requests that comes at every minute or two.
What's next for Coimiles in the next 6 to 12 months?
We're a startup, so I guess the answer is we don't know. I mean, that's the real answer. I would not want to come here and then you replay this podcast to me in 1 year and see how off track I was. So I guess if I had to make a call today, it would be like it's really growing in popularity, working in the scalability of the app, listening to our users, what our users are requesting, and making some traction-based feature. And scaling. I mean, really try to scale as efficiently as possible. We're not probably raising more. I mean, at some point, you want to, there's no way around it. So I guess another raise is going to be in the coming year. And then there's going to be a lot of marketing initiatives. And I can tell right now that some of us are going to fail because we're going to take risks, right? So we're going to take risks. Some of them hopefully are going to work out pretty well as well. And so we're going to keep experimenting. It's a new thing. I mean, giving cash back in Bitcoin to people is a very interesting industry, but it's also a new one. So, how many percentage of people would be interested in that, and how would they adopt Coimiles? That's the question, and that's the question I'm trying to solve as best as possible.
Maybe one last advice. Our listeners are aspiring entrepreneurs or startup leaders. Any key takeaways from your experience as a startup leader so far?
If they come from a non-technical perspective, business perspective, I think there's a lot of need first for someone who has more of a business acumen than someone that has this tech acumen. The two are super important. I guess from a business perspective, first thing, I'm not going to lie, is your capacity to raise money, your capacity to sell your story. So it's a sell. You have to be able to sell and make good calls and be realistic also. And there's surrounding oneself with prior entrepreneurs is the great thing. There's so many variables that come into play that we don't know until we know. I mean, there's always this unknown is super wide. It's wider than what anyone would imagine before taking that leap. And so, and we cannot be good at everything. We're going to have some blind spots. That's 100% sure. So I guess your capacity to attract good people around you and your capacity to sell yourself and your story to your employee, your partners, your investors, yourself when you wake up in the morning, making sure it's not just a story, making sure it's based on some tangible elements. And if you don't see those tangible elements, it's the capacity to make sometimes hard turns. They're going to come, 100% sure. They're going to come. There's still going to be hard turns for us in Coimiles in the future. I'm sure of that. And so I just keeping that energy and this transparency to yourself and say what works and what doesn't work and how do we pivot from what doesn't work into what works and be creative. That's just the constant mindset one has to be in if they want to be an entrepreneur.
I wish you all the best for the next 6 to 12 months. Hopefully
Thanks.
We will get out of that second lockdown. Thanks so much, Dave Pouliot, for being on the show, and I hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Michel. It was a pleasure.
Thanks everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. As usual, you can find the show notes at stanina.com. Also, quick reminder, we've launched an online course called Growth Leap, Design Your Startup for High Performance and Impact. You can learn more at academy.stunena.com. Thanks a lot and see you soon.